Let's keep reading Joel Richardson. The location of the Jewish temple, he says, has always been on Mount Moriah in Jerusalem. Today, the temple that once stood on Mount Moriah does not exist. It was destroyed, of course, by the Roman Emperor Titus in 70 AD, according to the prophecy of Jesus. So let's read the prophecy that Yeshua left us. Jesus left the temple and was walking away when his disciples came up to him to call his attention to its buildings. Jesus says, "Do you see all these things?" He asked. "I tell you the truth." Now listen to these words very carefully. "I tell you the truth, not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be thrown down." Matthew 24, 1 and 2. And so I might add, since maybe Joel Richardson doesn't say it, all of the temple stones were overthrown in fulfillment of what Yeshua said. And yet, if you go today to Israel, you'll notice that there's the Western Wall or the Wailing Wall, and there are lots of ancient stones there. In fact, there's a bunch of little pieces of paper stuffed in the cracks between the stones, which are the prayers that people have been writing and stuffing in there for centuries. And so you're probably asking, well, wait a minute, maybe Yeshua didn't get it right, because all those stones are still there. I thought all the stones are supposed to be overturned, not one stone to be left. Here's the answer to that seemingly contradictory dilemma. The Western Wall, as I understand it, ask archaeologists and ask Temple Mount Faithful, and they'll explain it to you. The Western Wall represents the supporting base, the foundational part of the Temple Mount itself. The supporting wall is not included in the temple structure proper. So when Yeshua was describing the destruction of the temple and its stones, he was describing the structure that was resting on top of the supporting wall. He didn't have to describe the foundational part of the structure. So that allows for us to realize that Yeshua's prophecy came to pass with exacting detail, and yet at the same time, in hindsight, we realize that he must not have been talking about the supporting wall. It must not have been seen as part of the temple proper that needed to be destroyed and its stones overturned, because the Roman armies that were led by Titus, which were largely built up by not just Roman citizens, but conscripted people groups from other nations as well, and many there in the Middle East, so that it was kind of a mixed ethnical army, and that'll come into importance later on, so that's why I mentioned it now. But those people, when they saw all of the gold and the precious jewels and everything in the temple, even though Titus himself, and you can read about this in Josephus, even though Titus himself urged them, do not do it. Don't do it. Don't destroy this beautiful. Look at the beauty of this temple. We can take the Jewish people and kick them out, and we can take this place. This can be our own temple. We can turn it into our use. Look how beautiful it is. I mean, the architecture and the craftsmanship. I mean, and look at all the gold and the precious linen and the artistry. The tapestry and the hanging curtains and all of the. I mean, there's a lot of workmanship that went into this. Don't do it. Don't destroy it. But the armies were just crazed by all the frenzy of caught up in kind of the mob mentality and the fire reflecting off the gold Josephus describes, and they went and they just overturned every stone, not in order necessarily to throw down the temple, but to look for more gold, because as the fire burned, as Josephus described it, as the fire waxed hot, the gold melted down into the cracks of the stones. The gold that was overlaying all of the temple artifacts, like the gold menorah and the table of showbread and many of the furniture and stuff, is overlaid with gold according to the Torah. So as the fire burned, that overlaid gold, which is thin sheet gold, was melted off and melted and turned into liquid and melted down into the cracks. And so that's why they overturned all the stones. It was not to destroy the temple, but it was to get at that gold that had seeped down into the cracks, right? That's the only way to get to it. Kind of like gold mining, the old, the easy way. So that's what she was describing. All of the temple the stones will be overturned. The Wailing Wall / Western Wall is not part of the temple proper. There was no gold that seeped down to those cracks, so therefore none of those stones were overturned. That's why they're still there today, and why you can go to the Western Wall and pray. All right, Joel continues. That was a little kind of a tangent. Sorry about that. Blame it on my autism. Today, Mount Moriah, sometimes known as the Temple Mount, or in Arabic as Haram Ash-Sharif, is the location of two mosques. Here we'll get the names that I was butchering earlier, and is considered to be the third holiest site in Islam. We know that Mecca is one of their holiest sites, and Medina is, I think, one of their holiest sites in Islam. There is endless, Joel says, endless speculation about the Temple Mount regarding issues such as exactly where the Jewish temple was once located on the mount, or whether or not there will be a Jewish temple rebuilt there in the future. And boy, all you have to do is do like kind of a Google search for this topic, third temple in Jerusalem, or go to YouTube and do the same type of search feature. And there is a lot of internet chatter and a lot of buzz going on these days about the temple being rebuilt and the controversial aspects of how that can be played out, especially because of those two holy sites that are up there on the Temple Mount right now. And so it's not a secret that organizations in Israel right now are already prepping for a third temple. They're just kind of waiting for the full-blown green light to go up on the Temple Mount and start constructing, right? But they're prefabricating, kind of almost like in modular fashion, like modular houses work. You build them in the factory like puzzle pieces, in you know, like a room here, a room there, a section here, a section there, and then you haul them in giant pieces over to the site where they're going to reside, and you kind of snap them back together and then permanently fix the pieces all together into one structure. They're kind of doing that with the temple right now, so that it could go up very, very quickly. And they're also manufacturing all the priestly garments and furniture. The menorah itself is already built, and it's on full display in Israel. You can see it's like in this kind of this bulletproof, theft-proof glass structure. Maybe I'll flash a picture of it in post. So they're training Israelites, Levites, how to do all the rituals and things like that. And they're even raising red heifers for purification rites, so that we can go through the necessary steps to purify those who are going to be working in the temple. They're getting everything ready, and yet there's still a lot of controversies. So Joel Richardson says, based on the above verses from the Apostle Paul, it certainly seems to indicate that there will indeed be a rebuilt Jewish temple in Jerusalem. And I agree that I take the position that there will be a full-blown temple that perhaps maybe could get built prior to the 70th week itself kicking off, right? Maybe even like, let's just throw out some sample time frames. Let's suppose here in 2023, a temple starts construction, and let's say it takes 5 years to build. I don't know. I'm just throwing out a number. So let's say it's built in 5 years, and then the Antichrist says, wow, I see the progress that you guys have made, Israel, with this modular temple. It's already built, but there's no peace agreement. So let me go ahead and facilitate a peace agreement so you can take this Lego set temple and move it over to its permanent home on the Temple Mount. Now that I kind of work out the political tension between you and your Muslim neighbors and get the temple put where it needs to be. Otherwise, think about it, people. Israel has had almost 2,000 years to rebuild that temple that got destroyed in 70 AD. Why haven't they simply rebuilt one on a different site? Right? Somewhere else in Jerusalem, or somewhere else in the world, somewhere else where it's safe. Why not build one here in America? I'm sure Americans would, well, maybe not. Got to rethink that one. All right. I'm sure somewhere a temple could be rebuilt, right? Israel could find some piece of land, some piece of real estate where someone's going to allow them, where they've got complete sovereignty, where no one's going to complain if they build a temple and start sacrificing animals. All right. Something like that. Well, I think there will be a temple that rebuilt. Maybe it's built before the 70th week kicks off, or maybe the peace agreement takes place first and then they start construction, so that when the midpoint of the week comes, there is at least enough of the temple put together. Because if they follow the biblical pattern like they did in Exodus, starting in chapter 25 with the building of the tabernacle, they'll start from the inside out. They'll start with the holiest of holies and work their way outward in concentric circles of building all the other pieces and then put it all together. You don't start like like a modern building where you start on the outside, frame it, and then construct all the inside parts last. If you read through the account of the building of the tabernacle, it's starting from the inside out. Start with the Holy of Holies, get that put together first, the ark and all that, and then build what's known as kind of like the tent of meeting, and then construct the courtyard around that, and then the palisade around that, and then all the other structures are built around it. So we start from the inside out. Well, perhaps Israel will do the same thing at the beginning of the 7th week, if one's not already built. They'll start with the smaller sacrificing edifice, the kind of a tent of meeting, portable structure first, and then start building up the temple around that tent of meeting, so they could be conducting sacrifices while the temple is being built. That's the point I'm trying to make, is they don't have to build the whole temple and then wait for it to be built and then move in and do the sacrifices. It's very efficient. They could start doing them right away as soon as they get the green light from the Antichrist. So that's the point. So the Apostle Paul says that the Antichrist will, quote, unquote, set himself up in God's temple. Notice it's God's temple, and yet it's a temple that will once again be desecrated by the Antichrist. Remember, the first one was desecrated by Antiochus Epiphanes that we read about in Daniel, and we can read about in history, right? Antiochus Epiphanes desecrated the temple 200 years before the first century. You can read about that in the book of Maccabees. You can read about it in Josephus' historical writings, etc., etc. So the temple was defiled once. It will obviously be defiled again. And then when Yeshua comes in to bring in his millennial kingdom, will it be this temple that he moves into? Doesn't have to be. I believe myself that during all of the military campaigning and the fighting over Jerusalem and the intense war that's going to be taking place, half of the city is going to be destroyed, and there's going to be a giant crack right in the Mount Moriah or whatever, and things like that. The Mount of Olives will split in two, etc., etc. So all of the destruction to Jerusalem that's going to take place during the 70th week, I believe the temple itself will be in shambles. It won't really be usable. I think it'll just be trash, rubble again. The third temple that we're talking about, it's one that's going to get rebuilt for the 70th week temple. That 70th week temple will be destroyed again, and Yeshua's just going to have to come in, clean up all the mess, and start his own construction again and build another temple for the millennial time period. That's my perspective. But the Apostle Paul talks about Antichrist setting himself up in God's temple, or more literally, quote unquote, he takes his seat in the temple of God. So it is described as God's temple. So then in one sense it's God's, but in another sense it's God allowing Israel to build a structure that there's likely not going to be any Holy Spirit activity in the temple like there was in the past, right? The Shekhinah that moved out of the temple, like is described in the book of Ezekiel, where Ezekiel described the Spirit of God kind of sadly departing from the temple, moving slowly from place to place, from the innermost places, like the Holy of Holies place, outwards, as if kind of sadly leaving God's temple because it had been defiled and polluted by man's sin and wickedness. The Holy Spirit left. The glory of God slowly left, and Ezekiel describes this. I can't remember which chapter, but I'll put it up in post-production. And once the glory of God departed from the temple and man didn't even know it, then what do we say of that temple? Ichabod, right? Ichavod in Hebrew is there is no glory. Kavod means glory, and is the kind of the negating aspect. So our word Ichabod means Ikavod in Hebrew. The glory has departed from God's temple. There's no glory here. And so it's really a sad narrative. But this 70th week temple will likely also be spiritless. I don't think God will fully endorse that particular temple. I could be wrong there, but I don't think it's until the millennial temple when the glory of God will actually return to the one that Messiah builds. So Joel continues by saying, this speaks not so much of a literal sitting down when it talks about the Antichrist taking a seat, as it does of taking a a position of authority when it says he'll take his seat in the temple. Could be a chair there. Could be that he plops his rump right up on the Holy of Holies, sits up on the Ark of the Covenant and takes some selfies. Yeah, he can post on his Instagram account for everybody to hashtag and follow. Hashtag sitting in the temple, hashtag abomination of desolation, hashtag Holy of Holies, check it out, something like that, right? Don't mean to sound irreverent, but it's going to be a horrendous event for Israel, because once that takes place, they will realize that this man that they trusted at the first of the week, right, 3.5 years earlier, this man that they put all their trust into, and that the world also believed was a man of peace and brought peace and prosperity to the rest of the world, this man is Satan incarnate. He's evil incarnate. He's going to seek to wipe us out. He's going to wipe out our religion, and he's going to impose despotic world rulership, world authority, and get the entire world to try to follow after him, right? He's really going to throw all of religion under the bus at some point in time, right? He's going to exalt himself above everything that is called God and every other religion. He's going to say, I am the ultimate religion. I am God, worship me. Satan finally get what he's been after for so long, which is the worship of most of humanity. In your face worship, right? Thus we see that the Antichrist will make Mount Moriah, and more specifically the rebuilt Jewish temple, he's going to make the specific location, the specific location of his rule. So for a little while, Jerusalem will be his headquarters, and in a sense, and we'll get to this in time, for a brief while, Jerusalem will effectively be Mystery Babylon. She will be the seat of Satan's authority in the world from a religious perspective. How much politically and militarily, I don't know, because Jerusalem doesn't seem to be the most defensible place in the world, although it's fairly safe in some regards because of the Iron Dome defense and things like that. And with Antichrist at the helm, he's going to be controlling where the missiles fly and where the bullets go. But at some point in time, as I understand it, he's, by exalting himself as God and by setting himself up as the ultimate ruler, he does utilize Jerusalem as his headquarters, just like Antiochus set up Jerusalem as a kind of a staging post to launch military attacks or something like that, at least to strategize. Satan, Antichrist might do the same thing in the end. He's going to use hijack Jerusalem, overtake it and occupy it and set himself up as a ruler there. But probably, I suspect, because he is a man who worships, the Bible describes it in the Old Testament as a God of fortresses. I think it's Daniel's words, if I remember. He worships a God of fortresses, which is a description of he's not really interested in religion or maybe even politics. He's more interested in military might. And so for him, the thing that gives him his authority or his strength, his foundational base of power, is his military might, his armies and his missiles and his nukes and things like that. So I don't know if Israel's going to be his military headquarters. It might be his religious headquarters, and it might be a staging ground, but it seems more likely that wherever he's really stationed from, like either in Turkey or Iraq or Iran maybe, or maybe even farther north like Russia or something like that, or maybe just a little north of Israel like Lebanon, or maybe as close as the Golan Heights or something. I'm not sure, but that might be somewhere where he can have maybe a large military arsenal, right? Jerusalem itself is just so kind of decrepit, old, and there's not a lot of place to put an immensely large amount of weaponry, like massive amounts of tanks and jets and nukes and endless amounts of grenades and missile launchers and RPGs and I said RPGs, yeah, and bullets and stuff. But if you go to one of those other areas that I mentioned, like where there's a lot more room where you can hide it from public view, right, where you can have like deserts and deserts of hidden bunkers of munitions and things like that, that seems more plausible to me. But so we'll see how this pans out.